snowflake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa, you can make us see it your way. No way, gasoline and propane. More flames, oh no, no more snowflakes. We can all get along, but there's no stopping. Everybody's wrong, that's a real problem. They don't want to hear it, but they still talking. Soon enough, we running out of options. This ain't gonna end till it's in the coffin. We ain't gonna be friends till we try to squash it. I don't know how we can make amends or we drop it. Snowflakes melt when it's hot, kid. Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes. Whoa, you can make us see it your way. No way, gasoline and propane. More flames, oh no, no more snowflakes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of HeartMind Expressions with the Fab Four. Amaria is going to be out today. She is not feeling too great, and she is going to have some wonderful R&R. So I hope that she gets better. But the show must go on, and I'm here with my wonderful friend, Sue McClure. And Dr. Bloom should be joining us shortly.
Yep.
And he'll be there. So, good evening, Sue.
Hey, good evening. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm just doing spectacular.
Yeah, that's, I'm, this week, I'm getting my workout. My little fingers. Been, on the keyboard trying to sort a lot of stuff out in the world.
Mm-hmm. And they say that keyboard warriors don't get exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have very in shape fingers and knuckles, kind of like just stretch out, like that.
I think my computer teacher in junior high used to do that when I was in a typing class.
Yeah.
When they used to give you the books and you had to do A, B, C, and they would just type it on a screen or something like that. That type of class.
You know what the most common ailment for that is, right?
Carpal tunnel, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Carpal tunnel.
Well,
actually, in my case, it would be worn out letters on the keys.
Well, yours truly deals with carpal tunnel on both hands. Or
wow.
Both wrists. It's just the part of dealing with things that are physically demanding, both in cyberspace and also in the physical space.
Yeah. Wow.
Oh.
Oh my gosh.
I do. So I don't know if you guys noticed this, but the intro was a little bit different this time around.
What made you pick that?
Well, Tom McDonald said that he was more than happy to have anybody use his music. And since he was not, so it's royalty free at this point. And I just found that the song was, I thought it resonated very nicely to the current climate that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. I think it's a great idea to pick it. That was very good.
The whole, I think right now we're in this world where it's if the oven is too hot for you, then get out of the oven, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's getting hot, it was preheating for a while, but now we're actually starting to feel it on the grills, and it's
well, the coals are being raked,
Yes. Yeah. So what's on the agenda today?
Well, the first thing is I just got a message from Dr. Bloom. He said he will be right there. So in the meantime, we will talk about the open border and not just the border itself open, but the plane flights and all that from every part, which way of the U.S. people are coming in from all over.
Plane, trains, and automobiles. Oh wait, no,
Yeah.
that's a movie. I'm sorry. Yeah, the border is well, what we're dealing now is not just the southern border like it was, once upon a time. Now we're dealing with refugees, quote unquote, coming in from Afghanistan. And actually, Jersey is one of the few states that have welcomed these refugees with open arms, and they're currently over at Fort Dix.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah,
we're gonna be
they're like roaming around the beach. I heard that they can roam around the beach and come and go as they please.
I'm not too sure about exactly how their accommodations are, to be honest.
Okay.
I haven't heard too much. But we're supposed to be welcoming these people with open arms, and I'm just wondering what happened to the thousands of U.S. citizens who are currently stranded over there.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And here, first off, I thought we were all worried about this whole sickness that was going around, and apparently I don't know how much of that's being kept in check. And then they're basically like speed checking people in the United States. So I don't know how thorough people are being vetted, but I mean, if you want to look at in smaller scale, to scale it down, it's kind of like having your own house. You're not going to leave the front door wide open and say let anyone in.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to check to see who they are. You want to vet them. You're not just going to let anyone in. So
Exactly.
so why would we ever have a totally opposite attitude here in the United States? Hey, there we go. So
And the
Hey.
and the prodigal son has returned.
No, sorry I'm late.
No
that's
worries.
okay. That's okay. We were just talking about you. No, I'm just kidding.
Good evening,
So-
doctor. How are you?
Doing well, keeping busy. Glad it's a weekend. It's been very stressful with work and all these changes as we've made a transition with a larger company that bought our therapy clinic out. And so we've been strong-armed into using a different health record, and it's just been a giant shit show. So that's consumed most of my efforts the past few weeks.
Yeah,
It's
it's actually like trying to clean your fingernails out with the tip of a Sharpie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
sounds like a microcosm for the world at large.
Yeah, pretty much. The program we used before was called Simple Practice, and it lived up to its name. It was a one-stop shop for everything. And now it's like everything's devolved. You have all these different programs that you've got to use for different things, and nothing works. And all the bells and whistles that clients were used to are now gone, and they're all pissed. And half my clients have gotten the email about the change, and the other half haven't. And the main front desk gal, she quit. The med provider quit. It's just a nightmare. So,
Wow.
and then I was eating dinner now, and they were talking. They had a program on the news, like a special about Portland and how everything's changed, and over half of the businesses have closed down, and there's violence all over, and homelessness and everything. And they basically were saying that the whole switch started with COVID, and then the riots with BLM, and they refused to say Antifa. They refused to give any blame toward the mayor, and it was all toward BLM, and that they were doing this for a good cause, and that Trump was kind of stirring them up, and they would take selective sound bits from him and spin it in a way that he was the one that was causing all the fuel. And
Wow.
awful.
Well, nothing new. In other words, same old,
I
same
know.
old.
That's right.
Wait a minute. So it's because of something that somebody said that someone had an action, but they willingly did that action?
Yeah. Well, you're seeing
Yeah.
that logic all over, right?
That's
This
We
is
all
this is part of the justification for words are violence, and words matter, and all of the social things that we're seeing play out right now about doublespeak, about 1984 with
I was
censorship,
just about to say that.
right? Because you're censoring your thoughts if you're censoring your words with political correctness. And once you can censor your own thoughts, they win. They get inside your head, and they don't even have to try at that point, And then you have, of course, Marxism and everything else that's playing out.
I mean, censoring your own language is exhausting. It's just absolutely exhausting. I don't know. It's actually like, it's almost like having that one neighborhood kid on your block that wants to play tag with you and a bunch of other neighbor kids, but he keeps changing the rules every 5 minutes on how to play tag.
You got it.
You're not it. I don't want to play with you anymore. You're exhausting to deal with,
Yeah.
And
everything is becoming subjective, you see, because it becomes increasingly subjective. There aren't overt rules anymore. And they've done studies on this, and this is the prerequisite of what's needed to cause division enough to create instability in a strong country.
Nation building, something that we were very familiar with doing elsewhere. But when we're dealing with it over here, it's a totally different ball game.
Yep. Exactly.
That's
yeah.
I know that I've been dealing with some issues over here ever since I got into my office that I am right now in for the county committee over here.
Oh yeah.
And
how's that going?
Yeah, how's that going?
It's going well. I started figuring out all the meetings that we need to do and how we're going to get active, because that seems to be the focal point, is that we have all these public gatherings. I know public gatherings. Ooh, it's a horrible thing. But I'm trying to get all the meeting dates for, say, the BOE or for the town council or for any other significant event that you need a public presence there to start really pushing back, because we don't have enough insulators to deal with this stuff.
Wow. So in other words, you got your work cut out for you.
Oh, I had work cut out for me years before I even did anything. It's been like this for a while, and I think that's the reality that a lot of people kind of woke up to, not just here, but a lot of different places, that things were just so bad, but we were just so unaware of it or willfully ignorant.
Yep.
One of the two. And now it's like, to use that analogy you did, Sue, with the clothing in the door, with the closet last week.
Yeah.
Now we're dealing with the door busting open and everything pouring out of it. And
yeah, we were actually dealing with stuff that was creeping under the door. It's kind of like the laundry room. Put a little too much soap in, and you can shut the door you want, but the soap is going to creep under the door and still get everywhere, one way or another. Now it's pushing the door open altogether, so it's just like a dam breaking, and it broke.
Well, yeah, and not only do we are dealing with that, but just recently, you guys noticed that we just had a natural disaster hit us here in the Northeast twice in a week. We had 2 major storms in 1 week. We had Hurricane Henri, but by the time it got to us, it was a tropical storm, and that flooded majority of central New Jersey. And then we had Hurricane Ida that just went through about 2 days ago, and that flooded northern Jersey, parts of central Jersey, and parts of New York. Oh, and also, as I mentioned, there were tornadoes that also hit too. And it's very rare for the Northeast to get hurricane force winds, hurricane force water, rain, and tornadoes.
Well, do you know what we call that? Do you know what that's called? That's called the bad guys stirring the pot. Literally.
It's called us actually doing something, and they're doing desperate measures.
Yeah.
It's them trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but we all know you can't do that.
Pretty much.
So they're going to be using their HARP tech to try to ruin things, but we all know that you just can't do that. The public, that we're at a public awakening mass at this point. There's not much you can do except try to wade this storm, if you will, but you can't. A giant has awoken, and it may be at this point just like basically pulling the sand out of their eyes at this point. But once that giant wakes up all the way, there's going to be a reckoning which the world has never seen, and yet we're seeing parts of it already in the world. It's just when the people here in the States realize that Uncle Sam can be used for good things and not just these destructive habits, then we'll really start.
I mean, the bad guys are extremely stubborn, and they will do whatever they can. And it's kind of like how when you pull the cork out of the wine bottle, you know how much harder it is to put that cork back in there? Well, there are people out there that are stubborn as heck, and they will do everything they can to somehow find a way to fit that cork back in the way it did when it was first new, you know? So they're trying, though. They're trying to pound it all back together, but, you know, it's not working.
You know, the funny thing about that...
There are things out there that Elmer's glue and super glue cannot solve.
Well, you know what? But duct tape can, because it has a dark side, a light side, and it binds the universe together.
I don't know. Does duct tape stick to bark? I actually wonder.
Well, that's the ironic thing about duct tape, is that it's good for everything but ducks. Air ducks, not like quack ducks.
Oh, the irony.
Oh, yeah. So, the thing that we could talk about, we wanted to talk about the abortion laws. You know, if you guys have heard.
Oh yeah, that was a massive win for reproductive rights.
I heard it was in Texas.
Yep.
Yes. So in Texas, they created the strictest anti-abortion laws on the books in the nation. It says that you're not allowed to get an abortion after 6 weeks. No questions asked, no reason, just after 6 weeks. Now, of course, you're going to have your people from what's it called, Planned Parenthood, and other pro-choice groups that are saying that's horrible. And so what they did was that they had this emergency injunction being put, and they went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so the Supreme Court did their job and said that no, they're doing the 10th Amendment.
Rights. Yeah.
States have the rights to do that.
Well, it was just sad that when people were kind of gathered around and stuff, they were talking about how they got abortions, and they were basically almost bragging to each other how many abortions that they have gotten, as if it was some sort of sick contest. And in my opinion, out of all this, is just my opinion, but it's a parenting right thing. So if you, I mean, in my opinion, if it is a baby, when the sperm and an egg say hello to each other, that's just my opinion. First off, then that means that the woman has automatically became a mother. So now the next question will be is, what kind of mother are you going to be? So that's something to think about.
Yeah. You know what I find kind of irony, the irony of this all is that we try to find microbes on other different bodies in the cosmos, like say Mars or the moon, and we're like, oh look, there's some bacteria on it, it's life. But then you go to, hey, we're going to kill this child who could definitely live in outside of the womb, and that's just a lump of cells.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Alex.
Yeah. So you know, it's a question. the psychological side of it, Dr. Bloom, is how the people have been programmed of the value of life, the value of people. When does a person start holding value? So what's your take on that?
Well, if we're talking about abortion in particular, here's the problem. We're asking the right question in terms of when does life begin. But the problem, and this is why it gets so hairy so quickly, is because everyone has a different definition of that. You know, for example, like New York State says literally after the baby is born, it's still counted as an abortion, even though at that point it's infanticide. I think it's a pretty objective understanding for most people. Like you brought the baby full term, they've already given birth, and yet you can still count that as an abortion.
New Jersey has laws that has similar laws to New York. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Disgusting.
So you've got kind of that extreme, and then you have kind of the other end of it, like what Sue was saying. As soon as the sperm and the egg say "hola" to one another, so you know, my point is that everyone is going to have a different definition, and that's what's made this so sticky. So that's kind of one piece. Now, on top of that, we're talking about a subject that's controversial because it's so emotional. Everyone, it's not like, well, I like blue and you like pink, or I have an opinion about, you know, this color of ice cream or this flavor of, you know, whatever. And, you know, we can agree to disagree. That we're talking about the very raison d'etre to why we exist as a species, to propagate, and when that occurs. And if we are to play God and stop that, regardless of the rationale, we have the technology to do that. And, you know, it just becomes very controversial very, very quickly because everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. Even if you come from a religious point of view, not everyone's going to agree, right? Let's say Christians, for example, you can have, we'll call them conservative Christians who are very much adamantly against abortions. And then you have like liberal Christians who are very much in favor of it. And they all fall under this umbrella of Christianity.
Yeah.
So, and then you get political and you have that extension of it. And then where's the money coming from? And for me, kind of regardless of that, because you're never going to appease everybody with an answer to those questions. And that's why we're continually in this situation. But for me, I think where I want to intervene is more of like what happens afterwards. Like, how can we keep a better track on what happens to those parts? And how can we make sure that those body pieces are not illegally sold, as is well documented that it is? And unfortunately, Portland is one of the largest hubs for that in the entire world. And, you know, just organ donating. I mean, the list goes on in terms of the sick things that happen. And most people call it conspiracy theory because it doesn't make it on your nightly news all the time, you know? And so if they don't hear it, it's outside of their paradigm, as so many things are. And as soon as it gets out of their frame of reference and they don't have exposure to that information, it's too extreme for them to even entertain that thought. And that's the problem, because you have sick things that go on that we know in this world. And then if those things are brought to light, then that's how they've been in part able to exist for so long, because it's been so extreme. It doesn't matter if you are, I don't know, let's say a celebrity, and you come forward with all this evidence, or you're a doctor or a team of doctors saying, hey, this is what goes on, or you're a law enforcement agency and you're trying to put forth the fact that these things occur, etc., that if it doesn't make it into public consciousness, then you get misbranded and labeled as something, and they sit there and they laugh and they're like, yeah, sure, go ahead and tell everybody. They're not going to believe you, you know?
It's kind of like kind of reminds me of the experiment of the Schrodinger's cat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the one I believe that's the one where we have a cat that's in a box and you do not know if the cat's alive or dead, and so you have the assumption of what it actually is prior to you even opening the box.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with the idea of the quote unquote conspiracy theories, you don't want it to allow that to be true, so you think it's not true, even though it could be completely true.
Yep, exactly.
You know, I mean, I remember many years ago we were talking about chemtrails and how that was working back like 2010, and how that was like, oh, that's crazy talk. That's not what's happening. And then lo and behold, back I think it was 2018 or 19, they were I think it was the Air Force. They were talking about the emission of gases into the stratosphere to prevent climate change. It might have actually been some other group, but they were talking about emitting aerosols into the air.
Right.
So, Dr. Bloom, what is you bragging about? How many abortions that you got and things like that. And when women do that, I mean, where do you believe that comes from? I mean, I don't know what they hope to achieve or accomplish when it's almost like a benchmark now.
I can't speak for all of them, so I don't know exactly why. But if I had to give a hunch, part of it is, first of all, they weren't reared in a way to view this scenario as a living being. And so as a result of that, it doesn't phase a lot of them in terms of when they have it, because number one, they're young themselves and usually pretty emotionally immature. And I'm being hesitant here because I'm not wanting to stereotype, but I'm just saying based on age. And so because I've had friends, I've seen clients, I mean, this is a common occurrence that they kind of laugh it off, and they, in part, what I have seen is because the act is controversial and there's such a pushback, especially, and unfortunately, this is where politics somewhat gets involved, especially we'll just clump them together and call them conservatives, that then these presumably liberal women then almost like to shove it in the face of like, oh, well, I've gotten 6 abortions, as a way to kind of stick it to them with the middle finger. Does that make sense? And so totally. As a result of that, you have these people sitting there, again, flaunting something that if they were more emotionally mature, there would be no need to do that, and I'll give somewhat of a very loose parallel here, if I may. And there have been several teachers this past week that have been fired.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Yes. With their
teachers. And one of them, I watched a video, and I think this was on TikTok. I mean, these women are just, I don't know, stupid in my mind of like, if you're going to have this philosophy, then why post about it online? It's just, that's the irony, because then they get caught and then they lose their job. So this one gal, she was flaunting the fact that after COVID, when her classroom reopened, she didn't put the U.S. flag back up.
Yes.
And so one of the students said to her, we have the option of whether or not we can stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, first of all. And she was indirectly encouraging students to not do that. And then second of all, there's no flag in there. And so a student went up to her and said, where's the flag? And she's saying this all on video, right? So she's like brazen about it, like just blatant, to the point of like almost flaunting it, which is my parallel here. And she's saying, oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't put it out yet. I misplaced it. Well, I'll keep looking for it. And she goes on the video and she's like, I haven't misplaced it. She goes, I just didn't want to put it up. And then she turns the camera around. She goes, but what I wanted to say is there's another flag in the room anyway, and you should pledge your allegiance to that. And it was the LGBT flag. And so she went on to say something about how the American flag is something that she didn't want to have up because she doesn't believe in it anyway. And I'm thinking to myself, then why are you here? I don't get that. Go live elsewhere, number one. But number two, because good luck trying to have that carry out in lots of other countries, you know. But number two, it's like, this is my point, that it's a mindset, that there's a pushback in their mind by this other side of the aisle that they want to be so adamantly against that they'll go to these extreme lengths in order to prove that they are not among that other side. And I'm not saying that this is all of them or that this is the only rationale for what happens, but it is a common link that I see from a mindset perspective, you know? And so that makes sense to me in terms of why they would sit there and brag about how they've had 6 abortions, you know?
Yeah, and it goes along with, you know, that people have the freedom of choice and through any means by any subject. I mean, we do have, I mean, it's one of the things about living in America, you do have the freedom of choice. And we should have the freedom of choice in absolutely every subject. And it's mind-boggling how much that the government decides to stick their nose in all sorts of topics and subjects of our lives. I just absolutely disagree with that. I mean, they can be there as guidance, in my opinion. They can be there with suggestions. They can be there with ideas. I just don't see that they should be enforcing and, you know, running an iron fist and a gavel in their hand and making it anything, a mandatory set, your opinion or your point of views, you know, a must have and a have to.
Well, a lot of this is unfortunately the mindset, Sue, that's been carried out for many, 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 many decades of slowly turning the screw to brainwash generations of people to support large government and have more federal oversight. And that is not, as we know, the intentions of our founding fathers. That this is why so much energy was given to states' rights. And now people think like states' rights? What are you talking about? Like, it's the government, it's Washington, D.C. That's who's in control. You know, that's what the average person thinks. And you see, like, I'll give a perfect parallel from what I was saying at the beginning when I hopped on about Portland. And about how, you know, the mayor and for that matter, Kate Brown, our governor, did absolutely nothing when the riots were going on. And Trump was saying, this was ironically that one of the sound clips that they were playing on the news tonight, that Trump had said, you know, I can come in and within 30 minutes, do you remember him saying this? I can literally wipe out all of everything that's going on and stop the riots. And my point is, he was putting the emphasis through education back on the fact that I'm not going to intervene into the states, but if they call upon me and ask me to, we can fix this problem and work together. That is how it should be. And instead, you have clearly the buck stopping with the governor and the mayor, who both basically turned a blind eye and wanted to sit there and blame Trump. And of course, then when nothing was done, they wanted to blame him. And, you know, no matter what he did, he was going to get blamed. And so, you know, but it was a real eye-opener for many people in terms of like, well, what the hell? There's 20 cities that are burning right now in the country, and 17 of them are all run by one political party. Now, I'm sorry, but there is a common link here that needs to be addressed. And because that common party is unfortunately the same party that seems to predominate what's in our current culture with news and education, Hollywood and entertainment, etc., that then that point isn't really addressed. And if you try to address it, all of a sudden you're going to be censored, you know?
So to your comment about freedom of choice and stuff like that, or expression, I agree that we have the rights to freedom of expression, the freedom of choice. But what a lot of people I've noticed are associating with that is the freedom or the protection from the results of that action.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for instance, the abortion topic we're talking about. yes, you're doing this stuff, but then you're still going to have to deal with the fact that you have done that action. And it will be on your medical records, I would assume, later on that, oh, these things have happened.
Yeah.
Well, and also, let's look at it from a structural perspective of both how it began as well as currently what goes on. So we touched on this very questionable activity of what happens to whatever we want to call it, the clump of cells, the carcass, etc., in terms of it being sold on the black market. Research for those listeners out there, the funnel of money with Planned Parenthood and how money comes into Planned Parenthood as well as where that money goes to. And then research Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. And she was African American. And she it's well documented that she started abortion in black communities in order to push essentially murder and
genocide.
Yeah, exactly. And anyway, so it's so insidious in terms of how uneducated we are with a lack of access to information about the historical context of different things. And
mind if I jump in real quickly? Just 2 seconds.
Yeah, go ahead.
You brought up Margaret Sanger. Look at the people who are getting the Margaret Sanger Award.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was all I wanted to mention. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess for me, my biggest gripe is everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Mm-hmm. But I truly believe that if you're going to have your own opinion, it should be based on information. It should be an informed opinion. And we have these voters out there who are, the buzz term is low informed voters, because they don't have the time to do research. And they might hear news clips here and there or read some articles or headlines, and then they fall prey to emotion-based thinking, which is, well, I'm informed. Don't tell me I'm not informed. That's like saying, well, I'm smart, I'm intelligent. It's like, well, yeah, no one likes to be called dumb. But at the same time, there's a continuum in terms of how intelligence is measured, Mm-hmm. And if you say, well, everybody's of average intelligence, then you don't understand what the word average means from a statistical point of view,
Or the terms common sense even.
Exactly. Common sense is all but lost nowadays. I listened to a whole diatribe by a Texas senator a couple nights ago. It was fascinating. And I can try to find it and send it to you. And anyway, he just went off on how there hasn't been a new bill that's been assigned for us to discuss in the halls of government since 2016. And everything is about arguing or pushing woke agendas and everything. And he said it's all a sham in terms of when they want to post amendments, because there's no solid amendments. And everything that we say is, hey, I like your bill. I want your bill to become a law. I might add something to that with an amendment. And if there's any sort of good amendment without a lot of pork in it, then all of a sudden it's shot down because it's so stifled in terms of we can't even work together anymore. There's this large agenda, and it's so polarizing that even within certain parties, you can't have dissent. You can't have your own thought. Do you remember when, for example, when Trump was giving one of his State of the Unions, and one of the Democrat senators stood up and clapped at one of the things that he was saying about, I don't know, military or something along, I don't remember exactly what it was. And she stood up for like the military. And she got such dirty looks when you focus on not the mainstream media, but on C-SPAN. They had a different camera. And when they zoomed in on the other, like Pelosi and some of the others that were there, she got such dirty looks for not staying with the party line and not standing. So it's no longer about the values that an individual might have or freedom of thought. It's about complete adherence to the party. which is what I find so ironic, because you take the term liberal, for example, which means like free, independent, having more greater sovereignty. And yet it's through this doublespeak, through this think mirror, as 17 said, in terms of what's actually being carried out, that the liberal agenda, if you will, is really an iron fist in velvet covering. You know, it's the exact antithesis of being liberal. This is
Yeah,
why
I mean, you see
now
it in
have
the
to use
attitude.
the term
Yeah.
classic liberal. They
Yeah.
can't even say liberal anymore.
Anyway. That I actually have two stories, if I may. When it
Yeah,
comes to that.
go for it.
So when it came to liberalism, right? We are in what would be considered a republic that is based off a liberal democracy system. And so, but you can't say that. You have to say, oh, we're a republic, which is true, but we democratically elect our officials. It's not a group of people who just do it and appoint them. It's the public that does it. For most, there are certain offices that are not done that way. Like some states, they don't elect their attorney general or their secretary of state. Like here in New Jersey, those positions are appointed by the governor. But there's others where those things are democratically elected through any other vote. The second thing I wanted to mention was about the clapping with having the one Democrat flag, because I actually had something very similar to that happen to me in my first actual event I've had to deal with when I actually was legitimately voting. I actually was against the rest of my town because the way the committee works is that it's you have you're in one district of the town and you all meeting in one particular area within the county. Well, I was actually voted differently than the rest of my town, and we're like, oh, we have to be united. We have to speak with one voice. I'm like, I was elected by not the people who didn't elect you.
Yeah,
I'm doing what was right for what I believe to be best. I'm not going to just swear my allegiance to somebody who I don't know, and I don't believe that there should be people who have been there for, age-long time.
Yeah, exactly.
We got to get fresh blood in there. That way we can get rid of a lot of this stagflation, if you will.
Yeah, we have an elite political class.
Yes.
And this class, once they're in power, that it's no longer about representation; it's about being ruled over. So
there's a thing called cliques,
So the question we all need to ask ourselves is: are our elected officials ruling over us or representing us? And everyone needs to ask that question and then do their homework in order to find out why they support that opinion.
And to expand on that, I mean, you can actually see who they drag along with them, their attitude. So once you hear the kind of attitude, like Lori Lightfoot, she says, "We will cite you, we will find you, we will hunt you down."
Yes.
And on top of that, then you see the types of people that they employ, the type of people that work for them. The type of people that hold different other flags and different other, ambience and everything. They have all kinds of attitudes, and these with the party represent that particular type of attitude and tyranny, if you will. That's then on the other side, the Trump side or the Patriot side, you see the attitude that everybody else has. They look after each other. They're for each other. They're for the people. They stand with us. They want us to have a freedom of speech, a freedom, the liberty, and everything, the whole 9 yards and everything with it. And the people that stand along with them, they support peacefulness. They support, looking after one another. So you can see the attitude between who you serve. It's almost like you are who you support. It seems like, and you were
Right.
talking about even the attitude, and I know this may not be a politically correct term, like the Karens and the Kens. Who are they supporting? Well, they have the same attitude as the party that they support, and so it's
Right.
just that now we're seeing all over the news that they reverse it, they mirror it, and say that we're the ones that are having the
Mhm.
violent attitudes, or the ones that are the patriots are having the violent attitudes, or they're wanting
Right.
to destroy America.
That's right.
And it's just the constant framing, if you will, the framing of the parties.
Mhm.
And they're hoping that, I mean, they really would like us to shut up and go away.
Yeah.
We have been a thorn in their side.
That's right. And we're getting louder and we're getting more united. And it's happening not just in this country, but all over the world. And what you're talking about, Sue, has a name to it. It's called identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
Increasingly, people are being shoved into these, paradoxically, stereotypical boxes. So, oh, well, if you stand for anything positive that Trump has done, for example, then now you are clumped into this position where you are racist, where you are Trump loving, where you are conservative. I mean, the list goes on. And you are, all the different isms that are out there. And so, which is so paradoxical because now with BLM and everything that's kind of going on about race and about tolerance, and that's being kind of thrown around. These are paradoxically some of the most intolerant or even intrinsically racist concepts that are being pushed. And this is being allowed to be done because psychologically they are doing what's called projection, which means there's no ownership, there's no self-reflection. It's all emotion and it's all kind of anger that's gone on, either real or imagined. And then that anger, they've got to do something with it. And if they're not ever taught to self-reflect or take ownership of things, and they can be tolerant of only some things, especially if it's conceptual, but not tolerant of other things, it's not being framed to them in that way. And because again, there's no two sides of the story that are being presented. And so then all of that emotion is now being projected, and they're paradoxically doing the thing that they most hate, which is to judge and stereotype and be intolerant.
And I
It's
mean,
breathtaking, really.
it's affecting all kinds of, it's the next generation seeing it though. And I mean, we set an example to always the next generation, and we're even talking about little kids, that are seeing all of this. And so, Spielman, did you want to add to this? Before we go on to the next question?
Well, I not exactly, but I did. My train of thought actually kind of went back to what I was trying to go with the liberal democracy comment, which was back when I was in school, in college, I was taking a political science class, and my professor was talking about this dichotomy that we were talking about between the different identity politics. But he actually made it even more simple by just summing it up by one word. And he said, conservatives are regressive and Democrats or liberals are authoritarian.
Interesting.
Wow.
Now,
when was that, Alex?
I'm sorry?
When was that? What year?
That would be 2015, 16.
Interesting.
He was he was a doctor of political science, and he was a registered Green Party member. But on top of that, within that class, we were also talking about a lot of. There was a very anti-conservative notion, or anything that about an idea of liberty or self-sufficiency or stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
At that full disclosure, at that point, I actually identified as an anarcho-syndicalist.
Mm-hmm.
look that up. It's a very complicated topic. There's a lot of different the anarcho ideologies. That's just a rabbit hole on itself, just learning about all the different ideologies.
Mhm.
But no, because we were talking about different groups in like South America and South Africa. Like for instance, we were talking about Argentina. That was one of the big ones, and they were talking about the Kirchners and how they took over the country. I think it was a husband-wife duo, right? The husband was president of Argentina, President Kirchner. That was his name, and he basically created this socialist utopia, if you will, at this time. Where people own their work, they own their labor unions that controlled everything, and then he died, and then his wife took over. Like literally, there was no vote. It was just she was appointed to that position. And I don't believe she's still president to this day, but you could see the remnants of what happened due to the fact that they run that country down to the ground, even though it was doing pretty poorly in the first place. But that was the major. That was just the major theme that I was noticing, is that idea of socialism, of anarchy, of you can't trust anybody but yourself, fight the power, progressivism, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you did anything that would be considered moderate, and we're not even going to anything extremely conservative or anything like that. Just basically, you're just very moderate. That wouldn't be accepted. Even liberally moderate, it would not be. If you were not in that extreme, then you weren't even. You basically you were run to the ground, because he was talked about dissecting a country and dealing with it. He was explaining how a country needs to be legitimate. For it to be legitimate, the people have to accept it. If the people don't accept it, then it's not legitimate.
Right.
And and then I'm going to my head. I'm like, what happened that fateful day in November of last year? How we're having all these questions here. How they may or may not, depending on who you ask.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to actually understand that there's psychologists, psychiatry, there's all kinds of people behind all of this that knows the ins and outs of the humans and the inhabitants on this planet. They know what makes us tick. They've had lots of practice. If you look at history, there were plenty of trial runs of, trying out different tactics, different scenarios, different everything, just to see what would work, and then they would use it if it works. So that's what the hardest thing for people to swallow, is to understand that these are not just dorks sitting around and testing out different light switches. These are well thought of, well studied, well educated, believe it or not, and they know how to push certain buttons if they need to.
Yes.
They've had 8 years to perfect this, whether we're talking about social engineering or otherwise. And seeing if it wasn't so scary and devastating from a psychological and just political point of view, it's really breathtaking at how well orchestrated all of these things are, whether we're talking about different countries and all the moving parts in the medical system and otherwise with C-19, or any other aspect that we're talking about, how things are framed, how the news, and again, chess pieces, right? That like from Reagan to Clinton to Obama, in terms of just the media and how that's been controlled and manipulated into a weapon. And it's clear propaganda to where propaganda is now legal. Obama put laws into effect to make that legal again,
NDAA 2012 legalizing propaganda.
Yep.
Oh, so, by the way, two of the two books that were given to that class, one was a book by an author by the name of Robert Dahl, and it was called On Democracy.
Hmm.
And it talked about what were the. This is a trend that you'll notice in political science classes. They always will talk about how damaged the United States is. And that's a kind of a trend you'll see in universities. How horrible it is. They'll say, "Well, we can make this democratic." Well, you can't have a fully democratic country, because if you do, then that means every single thing is going to be voted on by every single person.
Yeah,
that's just infeasible.
And not only is it infeasible, but you see the exact opposite of that going on now. Like in Texas, what the representative was saying the other night that I was listening to, and how one judge has made the executive decision over the entire Congress of that state. And the last time I checked, he goes on to say, a judge does not have executive power. You know?
Yes, he doesn't. A judge cannot make laws; they can only interpret it.
And the fact that these emergency powers that are going on right now in all of these states, where these governors are given freaking carte blanche to do whatever they want to do, that was put into effect in the 90s. And it was meant for like emergency disasters, like as it comes to tornadoes and hurricanes and other natural scenarios. Not because of, a virus where these situations aren't even based in science. I mean, whether or not you can get a menu or you have to download a barcode, or whether or not children have to wear masks in school, there's zero research over any of this. Nothing that supports it whatsoever. And, Victoria had a good point. She's like, if, for people that don't know, it's my girlfriend, like for people who are needing to enforce masks in school, and the research that we do have saying that the sealed N95 mask is the only one that's going to hinder against contracting COVID, then why aren't those being dished out by the schools for the kids to wear? Why is it any mask will do,
So, yeah, it's...
And then one last thing was the second book is a book by Mike Gravel. He ran for president last year on the Democratic ticket. He was the former senator from Alaska. And his book was called People Power. So you see this whole, that was the thing, was the collectivist ideology. But I'll leave that there.
Yeah, the reason why all of this is going down, because back then we didn't know who the tyrants are. We didn't know who the dictators are. We didn't know what the attitude entirely behind their agenda is. So now we're starting to see it. And when Trump took a step back and said, here you go, I'll give you the reins, he gave them the reins. And the reason why they rolled out these emergency powers, because it had to do with the activity that everybody has to do with voting. So it was started out with that, but then it branched on that they wanted the emergency powers. But when doctors and researchers stepped up and say, well, there's these other ways to deal with it, the bad guys were like, shh, that doesn't exist. Don't listen to them. They do that because they wanted to hold on to the idea of the emergency powers, because if there's all these ways to fix the curve that they want to flatten or anything like that, if they want to fix all of the illness, if somehow it was fixable, then the emergency powers could no longer be used. So in order to hold on to it, they have to keep that fantasy up that there's no other way to deal with this except this. Now, Trump threw a wrench on them when he decided to introduce these medicine that, that's supposed to help fix it. And it threw a wrench in their plan, and it's now making it a lot harder for them to keep up with the whole narrative that we have an emergency here, and we need to do whatever it takes. And now their attitude is they want to make sure that there's no way any kind of illnesses can float around on this planet before we open everything back up, which is absolutely impossible. And that
Mm-hmm.
means we will never open back up in a million years.
And let's
So,
add on to that with the southern border. So, why is it that Biden's administration allows carte blanche in terms of having those flow into undocumented, flow into our country? Are they given COVID tests? Are they mandated to get the jab? Is there any sort of record on any of that whatsoever? And yet, then you have American citizens in states like California, in cities like New York, where if you want to go to a bar, or if you want to go to the gym, or if you have a 13-year-old child that you're not really so sure about whether or not they should get it, or you have some sort of medical reason in terms of why you can't get the jab, that then it's an all or nothing thing. There's such a double standard here in every conversation topic that we could pick, and it's exhausting. And this is where you have to take a step back, because the polarization that's going on, people are in their own little comfort zone. And so they use what's called the confirmation bias, which means all it takes is 2 months for a belief to be formed from the news. If you hear a message over and over again, it takes 2 months for that to become solidified fact that you believe, and you've been fully indoctrinated. Okay, that comes from research back in the 50s in Canada. So once you get all of these people who have been indoctrinated for not just on current events, but now we're talking decades, right? The entire school system. Look at Common Core with how that's caused this current generation of kids. I mean, my God, you want to talk about a lack of critical thinking skills? That's scary.
That's actually why that's actually the reason why I never finished my education. That actually I went to school to become a teacher myself. I think I shared this story with you guys a few times in the past, but I actually went to school to become a teacher. I have my associates in education as an educational practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so dismayed by when I was doing my in-class observation about how things were done. I had this notion of, oh, we're going to go teach children about the world and how things are done and how to experience it. No, testing. It was you had to deal with testing, you had to deal with this hierarchy of who you talk to and how you can talk to them and why you have to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also was, we're going to teach you about things, but only to a point. We're not going to go any further than just to a point. So, like, one of the things was when I was dealing with the fourth grade classroom. I was there when they were doing history class. They were learning about history, and the person they were talking about, and this is a fantastic person to really look into because this fits in so perfectly. Was Woodrow Wilson. And they were talking about the Titanic and and then we started talking about World War I. But the one thing they never touched was the Federal Reserve. They didn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to mention it. I was quartered out of that room so fast. They're not allowed to talk about the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
They don't need to know about that. I'm like, I remember what I did was I pulled out my wallet. I pulled out a $1 bill. It's not a $1 bill. It's a Federal Reserve note. And I'm like, what does this say? What does this say?
Yeah.
It says Federal Reserve note. It doesn't say United States dollar.
That's right.
And I'm like, these kids are learning money.
Yeah.
If you're calling these things dollars, well, then there must be some currency I don't know about.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
And you know what the word dollar means? The word dollar was in reference to a weight of silver and gold.
Mm-hmm.
Because originally, this paper fiat that we have was
an IOU.
Was created as that's exactly right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And it says very clearly, this is a good homework assignment for everyone listening. go and reread. You can find it online. The U.S. Constitution, as it pertains to how money is to be minted and coined, and it
Through
says very
through the Treasury.
explicitly in there that should be done in every state.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have this. This is why they say taxation is theft, and that the Federal Reserve is illegal, because it is. But
It
why
is.
can't it be touched? Because it's on neutral ground. It's not even on U.S. property.
Nope. So
So
it wouldn't be the United States.
They're experts at loopholes.
Oh yeah.
So you wouldn't have the United States government going after that. You would actually have to go through things like Interpol,
That's right.
because it is, since it is an extra national organization, you would have to go through international law, and that's even worse, because then I don't know if I want to go through this rabbit hole because it could take a while, but then you have to talk about the ECB and the BIS, the Bureau of International Settlements, and the World Bank, and how that works together. And then our good friends, the Rothschilds, because that's also kind of connected to that. So,
Yep, exactly.
but I'm gonna stop right there, because we could be here forever.
That's its own
Yeah.
show right there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things are actually not on U.S. soil. A lot of stuff is, and the most current thing is the election. If, believe it or not, as much as we want to say it's an American thing, and it should be, it's not. It's actually being controlled somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's we have to deal with the reality that we don't have as much freedom as you think. And like we said earlier, it is literally run by the powers that have everything like clockwork. They studied this. And it's hard for people to imagine that the entire planet can be run by 8 different families.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous, impossible notion to a lot of people that they control absolutely everything, from the schools to the food to the medicine to the media, and it is ridiculous sounding, but it's true. It's been run that way. Now, one of the things that I want to note here, that all of this stands on a psychological ground on people. So what would the psychological impact it had that the sickness has done on everyone, and the kids and adults? You and I kind of talked about this last night a little bit, and like CRT, like adult classes for children, and the cloth on the face, and the hand sanitizers, the teaching kids to distance, no hug, elbow bump instead of handshake. In your opinion, Dr. Bloom, what do you see now and the future of how this is affecting, children and adults with all of this?
Well, here's what's scary, because the answer is we don't know. That's what's scary. It's too early to say. We can speculate, but we are in such new territory, because it's not like this is just happening in certain counties, or there's who knows what, a temporary outbreak in a school, and we're dealing with things from a short-term perspective. This has been a global concern for going on, 2 full years now almost. And who knows how much longer, right? So with that, I mean, I guess the first piece that stands out to me is dealing with the kids, because that's what kind of tears at my heartstrings the most. And seeing them from, I'd say, I mean, it starts really kind of soon out of the womb, but going until they're probably, depends on what learning theory you're focusing on, but I'll say late elementary school, that kids fall prey to what's called social referencing, which means as they try to cobble together some understanding and structure of the world, they're using the outside world as a reference for them in order to interpret their inner world as well as the world at large. And we're in such a state of flux right now in the outer world that again, we don't know the impact of this in terms of how that's going to warp their sense of reality, you know. But one of those, and this is kind of what's most insidious to me because of what I do for work, but it's with our faces. There's so much information that we gain, especially toward children with this social referencing concept, with the face. And if 50% of that is now gone because you can maybe hear muffled words, but you can't interpret the tone or the implication of that because you're not seeing if someone's smiling, if someone's sticking out their tongue at you, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of this is what I fear is then not giving or going to give the children enough data to properly braille their world, you know, in the way that we used to do. Again, we don't know, but I'll take even a more poignant example on how it affects me. If I were to go back into the office, theoretically, and see clients, if I'm less than, it was either 6 or 10 feet away, I think it's 8 feet from the client, if I'm like in a smaller room or whatnot, then we have to wear a mask. And I'm sorry, but first of all, I would never do that in general. Thank God we have the online alternative. But second of all, you want to talk about damaging to the therapy experience. I mean, that's a condensed version of what I'm talking about to children as they're trying to, go through the different stages of growth. Because there's so much information, even in a compacted 50-minute therapy session, in terms of their facial expression and highlighting that compared to everything else that's going on. That is such rich data right there, and you're losing 50% of it, which makes the therapy experience so watered down that, people say, oh, well, what about online? You lose so much of that personal quality because you're doing it all over a video screen. And I want to say, yeah, but I'd take that any day over having to wear a mask, both of us, because it goes both ways, right? It's not just me interpreting their facial expression, but vice versa. If we have to do it in person. So it just really gets me fired up because the most important thing is, we want to make decisions that are science-based. And why aren't we having conversations about how this is controversial? Forget the whole political piece. Forget the whole kind of, I don't want to wear a mask because it tramples on my freedom. Let's just have the conversation of, is this truly based in science? And why are there articles out there that some of them are being revoked from after having gone through vigorous peer-reviewed science with whole teams of folks that are kind of looking at the data and then agreeing to have that published? Why is it only later to have that yanked? Is it possible that science could be somehow influenced by political agendas? And it's just very frustrating to see. Again, this is where when you take a step back from the emotion of it and you look at the broad point of view, to see the influence that this cabal, or whatever word we want to put toward these groups of people, have to orchestrate such a carrying out of what's gone on, it's very applaudable, I'll say. But the problem is, it's just messing with humanity and our own future.
Yeah, well, I saw a video of a little boy. I think he probably was 2 or 3 years old, and he's running around with his family, but he's touching everything as if they're hand sanitizer dispensers, the nozzle, the fire hydrant, look, those little meters that are on the side of buildings and whatever not. It's just the example that is being set. So if you're seeing that kids are watching the example of how the world is now being run, and they've only been in the world anywhere between 1 to 3 years. Yeah. So they were right at the start of this whole thing. And so it's really sad to see that the examples that we were raised with is not exactly the same as the examples that are running out around now. And it takes a village to raise a kid, but the villagers have changed their tune.
Yeah, exactly. And let me say one more thing. So I was talking about kind of social psychological, but let's look at it from a health perspective. That part of how, like I was saying, the social referencing for children to understand their world. Now let's look at it from a physical, tactile point of view. You know, if you've ever been around a small child, you see that they are constantly touching things, just like you were saying, Sue, and playing around on the ground and exploring their world. And as a result of that, they're going to put then the objects that they come across in their mouth. That's part of that exploration. And if you understand the basics of virology, which unfortunately the vast majority of people do not, that if you're going to grow an immunity and have a strong immune system, you have to have exposure to things. If you lock yourself up in a Lysol filled world, then you're not getting that proper exposure in order to have that robust immune system. So actually having hand sanitizer everywhere is an absolutely horrific message to be giving to the youth, because
It's
number
doing
one,
the opposite.
exactly, it's doing the opposite in their bodies. But number two, they're being warped. Here we are, think mirror again, in terms of not only being like germaphobes, and wanting to be averse to anything that's dirty, but that they don't even understand why it's important to be around that when they're young, so that then when they grow up, they become neurotic, right? And that's all they're doing. And actually, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but I've heard from 3 different people that the main hand sanitizer that we kind of use is linked to health problems down the road. So
Yes, yeah. Go for it.
I constantly kind of just bounced back from this, and when the swine flu, when that was going around, and how we dealt with these things very differently.
mm-hmm.
Even though they were both, classified as pandemics, we dealt with it in a very different way. And I remember several was it months or weeks after we basically got the okay, this thing is finally under control, and there was this massive outbreak in Brooklyn in their local hospital
Mm-hmm.
due to hand sanitizer and Lysol and Clorox. And what was happening was that they were creating superbugs.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the outbreak they were dealing with was MRSA, which is a bacteria-resistant pathogen.
Yeah,
you just can't use penicillin on this thing. It takes a long time to use penicillin. So what they had to do is they ripped all the hand sanitizer capacitors out of the building. They got rid of all the wipes, all the bleach, everything out of the building, and they quarantined the building. No one was coming in, no one was coming out. They're just like, we're just going to ride through this, and it was through within 2 weeks. But that's what I'm concerned about is if that was just one hospital. Imagine what that will do internationally.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have something far worse than what we're dealing with right now if we continually try to inundate our bodies with just these super sanitary environments.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Exactly.
Absolutely. And when the kids are growing up, and I was wondering if you've ever had clients that's never been hugged or never been kissed or never had any close contact with anyone. What effects does that have on a child?
Well, it has horrific effects, and we have absolute science to support this. I mean, there was studies going back to the 30s through the 60s in terms of, this is called attachment theory. And at first they were doing this in monkeys and other apes.
I actually watched this experiment. I know which one you're talking about.
Yep. And they had terry cloth. Well, that's kind of its own kind of discussion in terms of the studies. But then from there, they moved to, I can't remember the order. I think they might have started with that and then moved to orphans, or it might have been vice versa. I don't recall offhand. I think it then moved to orphans. And then they did this study where they said, okay, so we're going to have very, very young children, like infants, and we'll feed them and make sure that they're clothed and changed and everything, but no physical touch, none. And do you know what happened? Before the study was over, all the children, all the infants that were not touched died. They literally died. So this is absolutely crucial to have touch. I have clients that when I used to see them in person, they would want to give me a hug because they have no one else to hug them. And so that one physical embrace is something that they would look forward to for 2 weeks.
Wow.
There are services now. You want to talk about how sick our society has been. There were, I mean, this is pre-COVID, but services where you could hire them, and I saw the car once at the grocery store, and I was like, what is this? And I looked it up, and their services where they can come and you can cuddle or spoon or hug these people.
Yes, professional cuddlers. Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, cuddling services. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
because now the whole social distancing and stuff, that you can't be anywhere near it, and there's a lot of parents out there that believe in this whole thing that's going on, and so they won't hug their children. They won't, there's no closeness. There's basically almost kind of treating them at arm's length and raising them at arm's length. A lot of parents are doing it. They feel that they need to have this obedience because they feel that they are caring for their children, when it's actually the exact opposite result seems to be happening.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, I think we're going to call it a day.
Yeah,
I wanted to thank you guys for joining me. Sue, Dr. Bloom, always a pleasure for you guys to come with us, come here. And I'm always wonderful when Amari invites me on. And
we give you a virtual hug, Alex.
What was that?
I said we'll give you a virtual hug since we can't.
Virtual hug, yes.
Why don't we just do the sign language for applause, because that was the thing they did in school. But but anyways, guys, thanks you guys for watching, and we will see you guys next Friday. Have a good one.